cheap for what they are. This is 128 gig. It holds quite a few hours of recording, especially if you don't go full like max bitrate on this one card, which is really handy. And frankly, it's hard to recommend V30 or V10 SD cards anymore. Like, there's just little excuse for that when you get so much value out of these. The V90s are quite a bit more expensive. I wanted to test a V90 to see if I could just really crank up the bitrate on this thing and record it. I only have one, and I don't know where it went at the moment. So unfortunately, I only got to test it with V30 and slower. As mentioned, this little box can be used to record 4K, 1080p, or 720p recordings for pass-through and capture. It can capture HDR recordings, but there is no tone mapping either to the SD card or to your computer, which is really disappointing, especially since all of Elgato's other products related to HDR have tone mapping either in the driver or on a software level or hardware level. Most of them do it on hardware. The original 4K 60 Pro more or less does it in the driver. And for whatever reason, they weren't able to make that happen because this sends, when it's connected to your computer at least, it sends an 8-bit feed, which is no longer HDR. I don't know why they couldn't get tone mapping as an option to the SD card. Seems really weird. I'll have a couple different workarounds both for streaming and recording later in the video and show you how to edit it and things like that, but that is a knockoff of this that I find strange for the price and disappointing. The USB connection to the PC is only for streaming an H.264 video feed to 4K Capture Utility or OBS or what have you. It cannot be used for transferring files off the memory card. You can't even record to it inside of the device while it's connected to the PC. Really just kind of weird lacking of features when something that's been out a couple years for a lot cheaper, the AverMedia Live Gamer Portable 2 Plus, which only does 4K pass-through. It downscales to 1080p, but they've, on all of their portable devices here, they've had a switch where you can go between PC capture mode, SD card reader mode, and just power mode, basically. And something that's been out a couple years for a lot cheaper, the AverMedia Live Gamer couldn't make it work. Plus, the impressive part about this device, though, is that inside of it, it has an on all of their portable devices here, they've had a switch encoder, which is pretty bonkers. For the price, that is actually really neat. It also has a H.264 decoder or encoder, but that's only used for the USB connection as of the release. They are no longer using it for recording internally, but it will record to your memory card in HEVC 4K 60 HDR, which is pretty bonkers. HEVC is obviously required over H.264 for HDR in the first place, but even using it for non-HDR footage or for lower resolution and stuff, HEVC is a new video codec. H.264 has been kind of the standard for a long time. HEVC is a new one that has come out more recently that is high efficiency in the name. That's in the name, high efficiency. It is about 30% more bitrate efficient than H.264, which that translates to it needs less bits, less file size, less data rate in order to produce the same quality that H.264 does. So an HEVC file and an H.264 file of the same size or same bitrate will essentially be significantly higher quality in the HEVC form codec, assuming that it's HD or higher resolution footage. Pretty crazy that they included it in here. It's a pretty solid encoder. It looks great. You can set a max bitrate of around 140 megabits per second, but keep in mind the speed of your memory card. That's why I was talking about the V60, V90 before. The V whatever indicates the kind of speeds you can expect out of your card. So V60 means that it's a minimum max write speed, which means the slowest it can write is 60 megabytes per second. Now there's 8 bits in a byte, so you have to do some math to figure it out. But a V60 card can hold up to basically 1 gigabit per second of footage, which is 1000 megabits per second. So 100 megabits per second from this onto an SD card like this is no problem. That's actually what my A6400 that I use for a lot of my videos, it records at 100 megabits per second, works fine. Now this does record in variable bitrate or VBR, which means that it isn't recording that bitrate constantly, which is only a good thing for your memory cards, meaning that it's not as stressed at all. But you may see your files and be like, that's not exactly 100 or whatever you set it to, and be confused. That's why. It defaults to 80 megabits per second for 4K footage and then scales the bitrate down based on the resolution of the footage that you're recording. However, you can change that. In my opinion, 100 megabits per second is the sweet spot for like high quality from this, and I actually have it set to 100 megabits for every resolution that it records to, because the default bitrate it was using for 720p for like my PS3 captures and things like that was a little crunchy in my opinion. So whenever you put the memory card in the slot itself, it will blink a little bit and then it will put a folder on the memory card called Elgato. In that Elgato folder is a settings.txt file, a videos folder, and and a README file, which will tell you more about what you can do with the HDR videos and things like that. In that settings.txt file, you have some options that I highly recommend changing. First and foremost, there is an option to change the video recording format from MP4 to MKV. By default, it's set to 0, which is off. I highly recommend deleting that 0 and changing it to 1 and saving that TXT file and making sure you're recording to MKV. The difference between MKV and MP4, these are two different file containers, what all of your video data is stored in. MP4 is very prone to corruption should anything interrupt the process. So if you unplug the power on accident, or if you unplug the SD card before it stops writing the file, whenever you hit stop recording, the center light will actually blink for a few seconds as it finishes writing the file to the SD card. If you pull that memory card out of the reader while it's still writing that file and then put it in your computer, you're just gonna have like a 4 GB or however big MP4 file that isn't playable or readable, and it's virtually impossible to fix without expensive software and a lot of hassle, and even then you can't really fix it. I've already done this with this device, set it to MKV. MKV does not corrupt as much. Just trust me, do it. Secondly, I recommend changing the bitrate. There's a section measured in kilobits per second with various bitrates for the different vertical height resolutions. So 720p, 1080p, and 4K. So by default, these are very low for...
Para gravar mais rápido.